The window stretched across the entire wall. Kale Varen stood before it, watching the slow rotation of stars against the dark. Station Meridian hung between worlds, neither here nor there. Appropriate, he thought, for what came next. Behind him, the briefing room hummed with controlled chaos. Technicians ran final checks on equipment that had been checked 17 times already. Diplomatic aides whispered into comm devices, their voices careful and clipped. Everyone moved with the precision of people who knew exactly how much was riding on the next 4 hours. 52 years. That's how long the silence had lasted. Kale's reflection stared back at him from the glass. 32 years old. Too young for this, according to half the people in the room. Too reckless, according to the other half. They weren't entirely wrong. His fingers moved unconsciously, tracing patterns in the air. Syllables without sound, a language he wasn't supposed to know. Varen! The voice cut through the mechanical hum. Director Aldrich Morven crossed the room with the bearing of a man who'd spent 40 years making decisions other people had to live with. His gray suit was immaculate. His expression was not. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. They moved through the corridor in silence. The station's lighting shifted as they passed, responding to their presence with soft pulses of blue-white light. Kirnathi design. The entire diplomatic wing had been constructed to their specifications, a gesture of good faith that had taken 3 years to approve. Morven stopped at an observation deck. Below them, the docking bay sprawled in geometric perfection. A Kirnathi vessel rested in the center, its surface catching light in ways that seemed to defy physics. Do you know what happened in 2037? Morven didn't look at him. The miscommunication incident. We don't call it that anymore. We call it the collapse. Morven's jaw tightened. One word, Varen. A single word in the treaty translation. Their delegate thought we were demanding unconditional surrender. We thought they were offering collaborative partnership. Kale had read the transcripts. He'd read them so many times he could recite them from memory. 3 months later, they severed all contact. 52 years of silence, no transmissions, no visits, no second chances. Morven finally turned. Until now, the weight of it settled between them. You will use the translator array 9. Every word, every response. No improvisation, no interpretation, no room for another disaster. Morven's voice dropped. Am I clear? Kale met his eyes. Crystal. Morven studied him for a long moment. Whatever he saw there didn't seem to reassure him. The Kirnathi don't give third chances, Varen. We won't either. He left Kale standing alone with the stars. 16 months earlier, the archive room smelled like old electronics and broken promises. Kale sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by data cores that hadn't been accessed in decades. Most of them were corrupted. The rest were classified at levels that technically required authorization he didn't have. Technically. The holographic display flickered. Audio files scrolled past each one, tagged with dates from before the silence. Diplomatic exchanges, cultural programs, trade negotiations. All of it frozen in time, preserved like insects in amber. He almost missed it. File number 4847. Timestamp November 23rd, 2036. Source Kirnathi, Cultural Exchange Program. Something about the date made him pause. 1 year before the collapse. He activated the playback. The voice that filled the room was unlike anything he'd heard before. Not just the words, though, those were incomprehensible. The structure itself, the rhythm, the way certain syllables curved while others fell sharp and clean. Kale had studied 17 languages. He'd worked as an interpreter in 6 conflict zones. He knew what human speech sounded like when it was translated into alien frameworks. This was different. This was the original. He played it again, then again. By the 4th repetition, he was mouthing the sounds, feeling how they shaped differently than any human phoneme. By the 20th, his throat hurt from trying to match the tonal variations. By dawn, he'd found 47 more files. The archive logs would show someone had accessed them. Someone would ask questions eventually. But Kale was already running the audio through linguistic analysis software he'd built himself, mapping phonetic patterns, identifying grammatical structures that didn't match any human language family. Kirnathi, the forbidden language, the language of the people who hadn't spoken to humanity in half a century. He should have stopped, should have filed a report, requested official access, worked through proper channels. Instead, he downloaded everything to an encrypted drive and went home to begin. 3 a.m. became his natural habitat. His apartment was small, cluttered with the evidence of obsession. Holographic displays floated in midair, showing syntax trees and phoneme charts. Audio files played on loop while he slept, the subconscious mind absorbing what the conscious mind couldn't hold. His throat adapted slowly. Kirnathi required sounds that human vocal cords weren't designed to make. The first month, he could barely manage 3 sentences without his voice cracking. By month 4, he could hold a simple conversation, assuming the other person was very patient and willing to overlook approximately 70% of his pronunciation. There was no other person. He practiced alone, speaking to his reflection, recording himself, and playing it back next to the original files. The gap between them was vast, but it was shrinking. Why are you doing this? He asked himself that question every night. The answer changed depending on how tired he was. Because one word destroyed everything. Because understanding matters. Because someone has to try. Because when he listened to those old recordings, he heard something beneath the words. Something that felt like reaching across an impossible distance and finding against all logic that someone was reaching back. 16 months of isolation. 16 months of a secret that grew heavier every day. And then Director Morven summoned him to a classified briefing and told him that Kirnathi had agreed to meet. Kale said yes before Morven finished asking. He didn't mention the 47 files, or the 3 a.m. practice sessions, or the fact that he could now distinguish between 17 regional Kirnathi dialects and identify formal versus casual grammatical structures with 80% accuracy. Some secrets were worth keeping. The crystalline hall was not a room, it was a statement. Kale stepped across the threshold and felt the air change. Temperature, pressure, something else he couldn't name. The architecture rose in sweeping arcs that seemed to grow. Rather than be built, pale alloy catching light and refracting it into patterns that shifted as he moved. Sound behaved differently here. His footsteps should have echoed. Instead, they vanished, absorbed into the structure, as if the room had decided it didn't need to remember him. A circle marked the floor beneath his feet, barely visible. The material caught light at a different angle than the surrounding surface, creating a boundary that was felt more than seen. He'd been told not to step outside it, something about interpretive complications. He hadn't asked what that meant. The answer would probably have been classified anyway. The translation device sat on the narrow table ahead. Array 9, smaller than he'd expected for something carrying the weight of 5 decades. A ring of light pulsed along its surface, soft and rhythmic. Active, ready, waiting for him to need it. Kale resisted the urge to touch it. The last time he'd touched diplomatic equipment out of curiosity, it had locked itself and demanded 3 levels of authorization and a formal apology. He'd provided the authorization. The apology had been debated. Movement at the far end of the chamber drew his focus. The doors didn't open. They dissolved. The material separated like liquid white, reforming as it released what lay beyond. The attendants entered first. 3 of them moving with synchronized precision that suggested either intensive training or some form of shared awareness Kale didn't understand. Their robes were deep blue, marked with silver geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. Then she entered. Empress Saren moved with a stillness that made motion feel secondary. Every step was deliberate, every gesture controlled. Her presence didn't demand attention. It simply took it the way gravity takes falling objects. She was taller than the briefing hollows had suggested. Her features were elegant in a way that transcended species. The long ears that curved slightly upward, catching ambient light. Eyes the color of deep violet, holding an intelligence that felt older than her years. Behind her, 6 sentinel guards took positions along the walls. They didn't march. They manifested their movements so coordinated they seemed to share a single mind. Saren took her place opposite Kale, the narrow table between them. The translator array sat at precise center. One of the attendants stepped forward. They adjusted the device by a fraction of a degree that no one but them would ever notice. The ring of light pulsed once brighter. Saren regarded him in silence. Kale waited. He'd been trained for this. The opening moment of contact was crucial. Let her set the tone. Let her speak first. Don't rush. Don't fill the silence. Every second stretched. Then Saren spoke. The words flowed smooth and unfamiliar, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his chest cavity. The formal dialect, high register, exactly what the cultural briefings had predicted. The translator array responded instantly. The voice in his earpiece was clinical, stripped of all the layers that made the original beautiful. Human Representative Varen, this preliminary session will establish communicative parameters and foundational protocols for future diplomatic engagement. Standard opening, by the book. Exactly what 52 years of silence would demand. Kale was supposed to wait, supposed to let the device process his response, smooth out the rough edges, ensure nothing was lost in translation. He inhaled once, steadying himself. Then he spoke in Kurnathi. Honored Empress, I appreciate your willingness to break a silence that has lasted far too long. I will do my best not to introduce interpretive complications. The chamber didn't react immediately. That was the first strange thing. The second was the way one of the attendants froze their hand halfway to the table, fingers hovering above the array, as if uncertain whether it was still required. The third was the silence, not the designed silence of the room. Something sharper, more focused. A pause that didn't belong to architecture or protocol. Empress Saren did not move. Kale felt rather than saw the shift. Every presence in the chamber narrowing, aligning, recalibrating round what had just happened. He considered briefly whether he'd mispronounced something so catastrophically that he'd accidentally declared himself a piece of furniture. It had happened once on a different station with a different species. That had been embarrassing. This felt different. One of the sentinel guards shifted their stance, barely perceptible, but in a room this controlled, it might as well have been a shout. Saren's gaze hadn't left him. It was sharper now, not hostile, something more unsettling. Interest. You will continue, she said, still in Kurnathi. The translator array pulsed as if mildly offended by its sudden irrelevance. Kale had expected resistance, correction, confusion. Perhaps a polite request to return to established communicative structures, which was diplomatic language, for please stop doing that immediately. He had not expected permission. The array glowed slightly brighter, reconsidering its purpose in life. Kale kept his posture steady, though his mind was already recalibrating everything he'd prepared. Scripts, fallback phrases, carefully structured responses. Most of them built around pauses, around waiting for the device to interpret before offering anything back. Without that delay, the conversation felt exposed. Saren watched him without interruption. It wasn't an impatient silence. It wasn't even a challenging one. It was a listening silence. Kale decided somewhat irrationally that this was worse. I will continue, he said, in Kurnathi, matching her tone as carefully as he could. Though I should warn you, I learned most of this language through archived recordings. Approximately 30% of those involved people arguing about shipping logistics. One of the attendants blinked. Another shifted their stance just slightly. Saren's expression didn't change, but there was a pause before she responded. The kind of pause that is suggested she was recalculating something. You are aware, she said, that trade negotiations employ a highly specific dialect. I am, Kale replied. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware of that when I started. For several weeks, I believed your word for agreement also implied mild disappointment. There was a sound, small, subtle, but unmistakably not silence. Kale realized a second too late that one of the guards had made it. A quiet exhale that had almost but not quite become something else. Saren tilted her head slightly. The movement was precise and controlled. And does it not? Kale hesitated. This felt like a test or a trap, or possibly both carefully layered together for efficiency. It depends, he said slowly, on whether you're the one offering the agreement or receiving it. Another pause, longer this time. The chamber adjusted again, its balance shifting as the conversation moved further from anything predictable. The translator array, still glowing faintly, emitted a soft hum. It sounded neglected. Saren leaned back slightly. The movement was so controlled it barely registered as motion. You speak with familiarity, not precision, but familiarity. I'll take that as a compliment, Kale replied. Precision usually comes with people correcting you repeatedly, and I didn't have anyone available who was willing to do that for extended periods. You had no instructor? I had several. They just didn't know they were instructing me. That earned him another stillness, not confusion, consideration. Kale allowed himself a small breath. This part at least he understood. The moment where curiosity begins to override structure, where questions become less about maintaining order and more about understanding disruption. He'd been hoping to reach it. He just hadn't expected to arrive so quickly. I listened, he added, a lot. Public broadcasts, archive sessions, casual exchanges when I could find them. It's easier to learn a language when you're not supposed to be part of the conversation. One of the attendants shifted again. More noticeably this time, Saren noticed. Of course she did. Her gaze flicked briefly toward them, then returned to Kale. And yet you are now part of the conversation. Kale smiled faintly. That does seem to be the current situation. The array pulsed again brighter. Kale glanced at it, then back at Saren. I think it's trying to remind us that it exists. For the first time, something changed. Not in the room, in her. It was small, subtle, almost imperceptible. But the corner of Empress Saren's mouth shifted just slightly. Just enough to suggest that if she were someone else in a different context, she might have smiled. It is fulfilling its purpose, she said, by being ignored, by remaining available. Kale nodded thoughtfully. That's fair. I've met people who consider that their primary skill. There it was again. That almost sound, this time from two different directions. Saren's gaze flicked briefly toward the guards, then back to him. You are not behaving as expected, she said. Kyle tilted his head. I was given a very detailed list of expectations. I'm confident I've violated at least half of them. At least, she agreed. He considered that. Would you prefer I return to the device? The question hung there, simple but deliberate, a way back, a reset, a chance to restore the structure that had been so carefully prepared. Saren did not answer immediately. Her gaze shifted toward the array. The soft glow reflected in her violet eyes a faint pulsing light that seemed almost out of place now. Then she looked back at him. No, she said. The word was quiet, decisive. The array dimmed, not completely, but enough to notice. Kale became aware with slow and slightly uncomfortable certainty that the conversation had crossed a line no one had officially acknowledged. Not a dangerous line. Worse, an undefined one. Saren studied him with a focus that felt less like observation and more like measurement. Not of his posture or tone. Those were easy things, but of something less structured. Something that didn't translate neatly into diplomatic reports. You will answer a question, she said. It did not sound optional. Kale nodded. I've been doing that so far. I can continue the trend. You will answer precisely. That may reduce the entertainment value. A pause, then faintly that almost smile again. It may, she agreed. I will accept the risk. Kale exhaled quietly. All right. She leaned forward, just enough to make the movement intentional. Why did she said, did you learn Kurnathi? The question settled into the space between them. Simple, direct, far more dangerous than anything wrapped in protocol. Kale didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't have an answer. Because he had too many. The prepared ones surfaced first. Diplomatic necessity, cross-cultural understanding, strategic advantage. All of them correct, all of them safe, all of them wrong. He glanced at the translator array. It remained still, patient, useless. I thought I should understand, he said finally. Saren did not move. That is not an answer. It is, Kale replied. It's just not a complicated one. Her gaze sharpened. You invested 16 months significant cognitive effort and professional risks to learn a language your species has no official contact with. You did not do this because you thought you should. Kale rubbed the back of his neck lightly, a small human gesture that felt strangely out of place in the precise stillness of the chamber. I learned it, he said more quietly, because translation isn't enough. The words settled differently than the previous ones. Saren's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Elaborate. Kale nodded once. When I first started listening to your language, I used translation software. It worked, technically. I understood the general meaning. He gestured lightly toward Array 9. That device is very good at what it does. The device did not respond, but it always felt like something was missing. The pauses didn't match. The tone didn't carry the same weight. Sometimes the translated version would sound neutral and the original wasn't. He hesitated, searching for the right way to explain something that had taken him months to even notice. It's like reading a joke explained by someone who didn't understand why it was funny. You get the structure, you don't get the moment. The silence that followed was different again. Not tense, not uncertain, focused. Siren leaned back slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "You are suggesting," she said carefully, "that our language cannot be fully interpreted through translation." "I'm suggesting that no language can," Kyle said. "Yours just made it more obvious." A faint shift rippled through the attendants. Not disagreement, recognition. He saw it in the way one of them adjusted their stance, the way another's attention sharpened. Saren noticed. Of course she did. "And so," she said, "you decided to learn it yourself." Kyle gave a small shrug. "It seemed easier than being wrong all the time." "That is not a common motivation." "It should be," Kale said. "It would solve a lot of problems." There it was again, that almost laugh. Closer this time. Saren had not moved much, but the change was there. Subtle and unmistakable. "You consider misunderstanding a problem worth correcting." "And I consider it an annoying problem worth correcting," Kale replied. "There's a difference." Saren's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what did you expect to gain from this effort?" Kale opened his mouth, paused, closed it again. That was a different question. Not why, what. He thought about the hours spent listening to recordings he barely understood, the repeated attempts to mimic sounds his vocal structure resisted, the quiet, frustrating realization that even when he got the words right, he was still missing something. "I didn't expect to gain anything," he said finally. Saren's expression sharpened. "That is unlikely." "I expected to understand things better," Kale corrected. "That's not the same as gaining something." "That is exactly the same." "I don't think it is." "Explain," he hesitated, not because he didn't want to answer, because he was suddenly aware that this answer mattered more than the others. "Gaining something implies there's a return," he said slowly. "A benefit, an advantage." He shook his head slightly. "Understanding doesn't work like that. It doesn't guarantee anything. It just makes things clearer." Saren did not respond immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on him, but something in it had shifted again. Not curiosity, not quite. Something quieter, more deliberate. In the 30 years since formal delegations resumed, she said, her voice softer than before, "I have conducted 112 preliminary meetings with human representatives." Kyle blinked. "That's a very specific number." "I value precision." "That tracks." "None of them," she continued, ignoring that learned Kurnathi without a strategic directive. Kale let out a small breath. "That also tracks. They learned it to negotiate, to influence, to demonstrate respect as a calculated gesture. And you did not." It wasn't a question. Kyle met her gaze. "No, the words settled into the room. He felt it this time. Not just the silence, the weight of it. Saren remained very still. Then slowly she leaned back. The movement was minimal, but the effect wasn't. For a brief moment, so brief Kale almost thought he imagined it, something in her composure slipped. Not enough to break, just enough to reveal that it could. And then it was gone. But the room had changed, and this time no one pretended it hadn't. The silence that followed did not return to what it had been before. It couldn't. Something had shifted too far. Kale became aware of the smallest details in a way he hadn't earlier. The faint oscillation of light along the curved walls, the almost imperceptible hum of the chamber's environmental field, even the subtle variation in air density as it adjusted to maintain equilibrium between species. Saren's fingers moved, barely against the armrest of her seat. It was the first unconscious gesture he'd seen from her. "You learned alone," she said. Still in Kurnathi, but the formality had thinned. For 16 months, no teacher, no partner, no one to correct your errors. Kale nodded. "Mostly at 3 in the morning. My neighbors probably thought I had lost my mind." "Why that hour?" "Quieter, fewer distractions. Also, if you're going to sound ridiculous trying to pronounce something designed for a completely different vocal structure, better to do it when no one's listening." One of the attendants made that sound again, the one that was trying very hard not to be a laugh. Saren's gaze didn't leave Kale's face. You speak of it lightly, but isolation is not light. Something in her tone made him pause. Not the words themselves, the space around them. No, Kale said quietly. It's not. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that felt like it was searching for something specific, something she needed to find before continuing. Did you ever question whether it was worth it? She asked. The effort, the solitude, the professional risk of learning a language that could end your career if discovered. Kale thought about that, really thought about it. Every night, he admitted. And then I'd play another recording and the question would go away for a while. Why? Because every time I understood something new, even just a grammatical stressure or a tonal shift, it felt like he searched for the right words. Like finding a door I didn't know was there. Saren's expression shifted. Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something Kale didn't expect. She switched languages. The English was careful, each word shaped with visible effort. Are the same. Kale froze. The attendants froze. The guards who had been motionless already somehow became more so. Saren continued still in English, each syllable deliberate. I also learn, alone, in secret. The chamber held its breath. You've been learning our language, Kale said. Not a question, a statement of something too significant to be questioned. For 8 years. Ugh. Back to Karnathi now, as if the confession had cost too much to continue in his tongue. My counsel would call it treason. To learn the language of a species we severed contact with, to show weakness, to suggest that perhaps the silence was... She stopped. The unfinished sentence hung there heavier than anything completed. Kale felt the ground shift beneath him. Not literally, but close enough. How? The word came out rougher than he intended. Saren's fingers moved again. That unconscious gesture. She noticed this time stilled them deliberately. Contraband, she said, earth broadcasts, music, speeches, cultural programs. There are those who smuggle such things across borders that officially don't exist. For the right price, information finds a way. You risked that for 8 years. Yes. Why? And there it was, the same question she'd asked him. Returned, reflected. Saren looked away for the first time since the conversation began. Her gaze found the translator array still glowing its patient glow, still waiting to be needed. Because, she said quietly, I needed to know if I was wrong. The year was 2037. Kale had read the reports, watched the archive footage, studied the linguistic analysis of the treaty that had collapsed under the weight of a single mistranslated word. But he'd never heard it from someone who was there. Saren spoke slowly, her voice carrying the weight of decades. I was 19, third in line to the throne, which meant I had opinions but no real power. The treaty negotiations had lasted months. Both sides were exhausted, tempers were thin. Her eyes focused on something far beyond the chamber walls. The human delegation presented their final offer. Our translator, an elder who had served for 40 years, interpreted a key phrase. In Karnathi, it sounded like a demand for unconditional access to our trade routes, an insult, a threat. Kale knew this part. The word was partnership, but the translator had used a construction that in formal Karnathi implied subjugation. I was in the council chamber when we debated the response. The older delegates wanted time to verify, to ask for clarification. But she paused. I was young, certain. I gave an impassioned speech about dignity and sovereignty, about how we couldn't show weakness by asking humans to explain what they clearly meant. I convinced them. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I cast the deciding vote to sever contact. I was so sure I was protecting us. The chamber was absolutely still. And then, Kale asked, though he knew the answer. Then we discovered the error. 3 months too late. The translator had been ill, his judgment impaired. The phrase meant exactly what the humans claimed. Partnership, cooperation, not subjugation. Saren's hands had formed fists without her seeming to notice. By then the damage was done. We had rejected the treaty with such finality that approaching them again would have looked like manipulation, or worse, weakness. So we maintained the silence. For 52 years. She finally looked at Kale again. I became Empress 12 years after the collapse. Every year since I have sat in councils, listened to debates, made decisions that affected billions of lives. And every year I carried the knowledge that my certainty, my pride had cost both our peoples half a century. The weight in her words was crushing. So I started listening to your broadcasts, secretly, trying to understand the people I had helped push away, and then listening became learning, and learning became, she gestured slightly, encompassing the space between them. This, Kale understood now. The parallel, the mirror, both of them learning alone. Both driven by the same need to bridge a gap created by misunderstanding. Both trying to fix something broken. For 8 years, he said, you've been preparing for this. For something like this. I didn't know what form it would take, only that if the chance came, I needed to be ready to understand it. She met his eyes directly. And then you walked into this chamber and spoke words no human was supposed to know. And I realized that perhaps I wasn't the only one who thought the silence was wrong. The honesty of it was almost painful. Kyle thought about his own 3 a.m. sessions, the recordings played on endless loop, the frustration of sounds his throat couldn't make, the slow grinding progress that felt like moving mountains with a spoon. He thought he was alone in that. He hadn't been. We're a pair, he said quietly, both of us learning languages we weren't supposed to touch, both hiding it, both hoping it would matter someday. Yes, that's either very wise or very foolish. I haven't decided which, Saren said. Perhaps both. One of the attendants shifted, different this time, not suppressing amusement, something else. Kale recognized it because he felt it too. Hope. The time marker on the wall pulsed, faster now, more insistent. They had been talking for 97 minutes. The scheduled session was 45. Kale saw Saren notice it, saw the brief tightening around her eyes. The conversation had moved into territory that had no maps, no protocols, no predetermined endpoints. That should have concerned him more than it did. There are people outside this chamber, Saren said, who are becoming increasingly concerned. I'd imagine so. They will demand explanations. They usually do. You are not worried. Kyle considered that. I'm terrified, but I'm also not sure that stopping now would make anything better. Saren's almost smile returned. An honest answer. I'm finding those work better than the alternative. The doors at the far end of the chamber shimmered. Not opening, not yet. But the material was responding to something. Someone outside requesting entry, demanding it. The shimmer intensified. Then Director Morven walked through. His expression was carefully controlled. But Kale had worked with him long enough to read the tension in his shoulders. The two precise movements of someone operating under extreme stress. Varen. Morven's voice was professional, clipped. A word, now. Kale glanced at Saren. She gave the smallest nod. He stepped away from the table, away from the boundary circle toward Morven. They moved to the side of the chamber. Far enough for privacy, not far enough to truly escape the weight of what was happening. What are you doing? Morven kept his voice low, but the intensity was clear. Having a conversation. You've been off protocol for 97 minutes. The translator array has barely been used. And you're speaking a language you're not supposed to know. I'm aware of all those things. Morven's jaw tightened. Both councils are demanding a formal statement. They wanted to know what's being discussed, what agreements are being made, what the status of negotiations is. Tell them we're establishing mutual understanding. That's not an answer they'll accept. Kale looked back at Saren. She was speaking quietly with one of her attendants, but her posture had changed, less open, more guarded. The conversation had been interrupted and walls were going back up. What do they want? Kale asked. A joint statement, both sides. Standard diplomatic language confirming productive dialogue and intention to continue future discussions. Morven pulled up a holo display. I've drafted something. It's safe, acceptable. It gives everyone what they need to call this a success. Kale read through it. Every word was technically accurate. Every phrase carefully neutral. It meant nothing. How long do I have? They want it in 30 minutes, or they're terminating the session. 30 minutes. Kale looked at the statement again. Looked at Saren still speaking with her attendant, the distance between them suddenly feeling vast. And if I don't provide it, Morven's expression hardened. Then you'll have destroyed the first contact in 52 years because you couldn't follow basic protocol. Your career will be over. Any chance of rebuilding this bridge will be gone. And you'll have to live with knowing you had one chance to fix something that's been broken for half a century and you wasted it on. He gestured vaguely toward the chamber. Whatever this is. The words hit harder than Morven probably intended. Because he wasn't wrong, Kale had one job. Don't make it worse. And here he was improvising wildly, ignoring every rule, risking everything on a conversation that had no guaranteed outcome. 30 minutes, Morven repeated. Make the right choice, Varen. He left. The chamber doors sealed behind him with a sound like finality. Kyle stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of 5 decades pressing down on his shoulders. Then he walked back to the table. Saren watched him approach. Her expression was carefully neutral again. The vulnerability from moments before had been tucked away. Your director is concerned, she said. He's paid to be concerned. He has reason. My council is making similar demands. Kyle saw it then, in the set of her shoulders, the way she held her hands. She'd received the same message, the same ultimatum. 30 minutes. Give them something they can use. Or this ends. They want us to summarize, Kale said. Make it official. Wrap it in language that sounds meaningful but commits to nothing. Standard procedure for diplomatic first contact. Yes. They looked at each other across the table. The translator array between them still pulsing its patient pulse, still unnecessary. We could do that, Saren said slowly. Provide the statement, satisfy the councils, preserve the opportunity for future dialogue. We could. It would be the safe choice. It would. Another pause, longer this time. Then Saren stood, not quickly, not dramatically, just rose from her seat with the same controlled grace she brought to every movement. But this movement was different. The guards noticed immediately, shifted their attention, not threatening, alert. Saren turned to face them. Spoke in Kurnathi, her voice carrying the unmistakable weight of command. Seal the chamber, no entry, no exit until I say otherwise. One of the guards hesitated. Your Eminence, the council. I am aware of the council's expectations. Seal the Hua chamber. The air pressure changed, subtle but definite. The doors solidified, no longer shimmer, no longer permeable, locked. The attendants stared. The guards exchanged glances that suggested this had never happened before in the entire history of formal diplomatic contact. Saren turned back to Kale. I have spent 40 years as Empress, she said quietly, giving people what they expected, what they needed, what would maintain stability and prevent conflict. She gestured toward the sealed doors. And in all that time, not one conversation felt real. Not one moment felt like something other than performance. Her eyes met his. I am not ready to return to that. Not yet. Kale felt something shift in his chest. Relief, fear, something larger than both. They're going to be furious, he said. Yes. This could end everything before it starts. It could, or it could be exactly what needs to happen. Saren's expression softened. Just slightly. You believe that? I believe, Kale said carefully, that if we stop now and give them the statement they want, we'll have successfully completed a diplomatic formality. We'll have proven that humans and Kurnathi can sit in a room together and exchange pleasantries. He paused. But we won't have proven, Maikon, that we can actually understand each other. And I think that's what matters. The time marker pulsed, frantic now, 28 minutes remaining. Saren moved back to her seat. But she didn't sit with the same rigid formality as before. The posture was softer. More human, Kale thought, then corrected himself, more genuine. Then we continue, she said, and face the consequences together. Outside the chamber, Kale imagined chaos. Director Morven trying to explain why the room was sealed. Councils demanding answers. Protocol officers having minor breakdowns. Inside, there was just the two of them. And finally, the conversation they'd both been preparing for without knowing it. Tell me, Saren said, switching to English, the words still careful but more confident than before. What you hoped would happen when you learned my language. Kale switched to Kurnathi. I didn't have a plan, just a feeling that it mattered. Feelings are dangerous in diplomacy. Everything worth doing is dangerous somewhere. She smiled. Actually smiled this time. Not the almost smile. The real thing. You sound like someone I once knew, she said softly. My younger brother. He believed that understanding was worth any risk. Past tense. Kale heard it. What happened to him? Saren's smile faded. He spoke against the silence. Publicly, repeatedly, said we were choosing pride over wisdom. The council couldn't tolerate it. He was exiled. I'm sorry. He died 3 years ago, on a colony world far from home. I never got to tell him. She stopped, steadied herself. I never got to tell him he was right. The grief in her voice was raw, unguarded. Kale thought about his own losses, his own regrets, the things left unsaid because time ran out before courage arrived. I think, he said quietly, he probably knew. Saren looked at him, really looked, not as empress to diplomat, as one person to another across the space that loss creates. You give me more credit than I deserve. I'm giving your brother credit for understanding you. That's different. Bum, the time marker hit 20 minutes. Neither of them looked at it. This is the first real conversation I've had in 40 years, Saren said. The admission came easier this time. Every word I speak in my role is calculated, measured, designed to achieve specific outcomes. But here now with you, she trailed off. You can just talk, Kale finished. Yes, he understood that. The weight of always performing, always being watched, always knowing that every word would be analyzed, dissected, weaponized if possible. For what it's worth, he said, I'm glad it was you in this room for this conversation. Why? Because you learned English for 8 years alone in secret, knowing it might never matter. That takes the kind of hope that's very hard to fake. Saren was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached forward, slowly, deliberately. Her hand moved toward the translator array. She touched it gently. The device responded, lights pulsing brighter. We haven't needed you, she said to it softly in English. But you have been witness. That matters too. The array's light stabilized, as if acknowledging, as if understanding its new purpose. Not translation, documentation, evidence that two people from different worlds had found a way to speak to each other without needing anything between them except courage and effort. 15 minutes remaining. The chamber's environmental systems adjusted again, responding to something, the extended duration, the shift in emotional temperature, the fact that history was being made in ways that couldn't be quantified by standard metrics. When they finally break through those doors, Kale said, what do we tell them? Saren considered that. The truth, she said finally, that we spoke, we understood, and we are not finished. They won't like that. They will have to adapt. Kale felt a laugh building in his chest. Inappropriate probably, but genuine. You're about to create a diplomatic incident. Saren corrected. We are about to create one together. Fair. 10 minutes. Time was running out. But for the first time in 52 years, something new was beginning. And neither of them was ready to let it end. 5 minutes. The time marker no longer pulsed. It blazed, a steady crimson glow that painted the chamber walls in urgency. Kale could feel the pressure building outside. Literally feel it. The environmental systems were compensating for something. Probably Director Morven attempting to override the door seals. Probably failing. Saren sat across from him, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, in a way that suggested either perfect composure or complete acceptance of consequences. Kale suspected it was the second. They will not wait much longer, she said. No, we should decide what we are going to tell them. Kale looked at the translator array. Still glowing, still recording. Every word they'd spoken since he'd first broken protocol had been captured, stored, preserved. Evidence, wow. What if, he said slowly, we didn't tell them anything? Saren's eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. That device has been recording this entire conversation. Every word, every moment, every time we switched languages or spoke without translation. Kale leaned forward. What if instead of summarizing it, explaining it, or wrapping it in diplomatic language that drains all the meaning out, we just let them hear it? Silence. Then quietly, you want to broadcast the recording. I want them to understand what actually happened here, not a sanitized version, not a statement crafted by committee, the real conversation. That would be, Siren paused, searching for the word, unprecedented. So is everything else we've done in the last 2 hours. She studied him, not with suspicion, with something closer to wonder. They will hear everything. My confession about 2037. My admission that I've been learning your language in secret. Your revelation that you learned mine without authorization. Yes, it will expose us both, make us vulnerable, give our critics exactly the ammunition they need. Yes, it could destroy what little credibility we have left. Kale met her gaze. Or it could show them that understanding is possible. That two people who were supposed to be enemies found a way to speak to each other honestly. That maybe the last 52 years didn't have to happen. The time marker hit 3 minutes. Siren's fingers moved to the array, rested there lightly. If we do this, she said, there is no going back. No way to control the narrative. No way to manage the response. I know. You are willing to accept that. I'm willing to trust that the truth matters more than looking good. She was quiet for a long moment. Then her hand moved across the array's surface, accessing controls Kale hadn't known existed. The recording is complete, she said, from the moment you first spoke Kurnathi until now. Approximately 109 minutes. Can you send it to both councils simultaneously? I can send it to every communication device in both diplomatic corps, every screen, every audio system. They won't be able to ignore it. Kyle felt his heart rate increase. That's significantly more dramatic than I was thinking. You said we should trust the truth. I'm ensuring the truth cannot be buried. Oh, fair point. Saren's fingers moved across the controls. Elegant, precise. Setting parameters, establishing broadcast protocols, preparing to release something that could not be recalled. She paused, looked at him. Last chance to choose safety, she said. Kale thought about the last 16 months. The isolation, the secret, the hope that it would matter. He thought about Saren's 8 years, learning alone, carrying guilt, waiting for a chance to make it right. He thought about the silence, 52 years of it, all because one word was misunderstood and pride prevented asking for clarification. Send it, he said. Saren's finger touched the final control. The array flared bright, then dimmed to almost nothing. Done. 2 minutes remaining in the ultimatum that no longer mattered. Somewhere outside on every device in the diplomatic wings of both species, a recording began to play. The reaction was not immediate. For approximately 30 seconds, nothing changed. The chamber remained sealed. The time marker continued its countdown. Kale and Saren sat in the quiet that follows irrevocable decisions. Then the environmental system shifted. Dramatically, the doors shimmered, not with attempted entry, with something else. Communication requests, hundreds of them, flooding the chamber's systems simultaneously. Saren touched a control. A holographic display materialized showing cascading messages, too many to read individually, but the overall tone was clear. Chaos. Both councils are demanding immediate access, Saren said, reading the priority flags. Along with approximately, she paused, 247 individual delegates. That seems excessive. They have all heard the recording, or are hearing it now, and they have questions. The displays showed more messages arriving. The count climbed past 300. Kale watched the numbers increase and felt a strange calm settle over him. The decision was made. The truth was out. Whatever came next would come regardless of how much he worried about it. We should probably let them in, he said. Not yet. Saren dismissed the display, looked at him directly. Before we face what comes next, I need to say something. Kyle waited. Thank you, she said simply, for learning my language, for speaking to me instead of my title, for being willing to risk everything on the possibility that understanding might matter. The words were quiet, sincere. Kale felt the weight of them. Thank you for learning mine, he replied, for choosing hope over certainty, for sealing the doors when you could have played it safe. We make quite a pair. Terrible diplomats, possibly decent bridge builders. Saren's smile was sad and genuine at once. The councils will likely relieve us both of our positions. Probably, Play. And we will have to live with the consequences of this choice for the rest of our lives. Yes. I find, she said softly, that I am at peace with that. Kale realized he was too. The time marker hit 0, then blinked out entirely as if acknowledging its own irrelevance. Saren stood, gestured to the doors. Ready, er? Absolutely not. Good. Neither am I. The doors dissolved. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming. Director Morvan stood at the front of a crowd that filled the antechamber beyond. His expression was unreadable. Behind him, human delegates argued with each other in urgent whispers. Aides frantically checked data pads. Security personnel looked uncertain about what they were supposed to be securing against. On the other side, Saren's council members stood in rigid formation. Their faces ranged from outrage to stunned. One elder was openly weeping. Another looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 2 hours. Everyone started talking at once. Morvan raised his hand. The human side quieted. Mostly. An elderly Kurnathi council member, her ears gray with age, did the same. The Kurnathi side fell silent immediately. The elder spoke first. In Kurnathi, her voice carrying the weight of authority earned over decades. Empress Saren, we have heard the recording in its entirety. Do you confirm its authenticity? I do, Saren replied, steady, unflinching. You confess to actions that violate council protocol, to learning a restricted language, to making decisions without consultation. Do you understand the severity of these violations? I understand them completely. The elder's expression was unreadable. And you human, Kale Varen, you also violated your people's protocols, learned our language without authorization, spoke at informal proceedings without clearance. Kyle stepped forward. I did. Why? The question came from Morvan, sharp, demanding. Why would you risk everything we've worked toward for 52 years on a personal initiative? Kale looked at him, at all of them, human and Kurnathi alike. Because I read the transcripts from 2037, he said. I saw how one misunderstood word destroyed half a century of potential cooperation. And I thought maybe, just maybe, if I actually understood the language, instead of relying on translation, we could avoid making the same mistake. That was not your decision to make, an aide protested. You're right, it wasn't. I made it anyway. Murmurs rippled through both groups. The Kurnathi elder turned to Saren. And you, Empress, you learned their language over 8 years, in secret, risking exposure, risking your authority. For what purpose? Saren's voice didn't waver. To understand whether I was wrong about the silence, about the collapse, about 52 years of certainty that felt less certain with each passing year. And your conclusion? I was wrong. We were all wrong. We let pride and fear prevent us from asking a simple question. Did we understand each other correctly? The elder's expression flickered, something that might have been pain. I was there, she said quietly. In 2037, I voted for the silence. The chamber went completely still. I remember, the elder continued, the anger, the certainty, the conviction that we had been insulted beyond repair. She paused. I also remember the doubt that came later. The questions we did not ask because asking would have meant admitting we might have been wrong. She looked at Saren, then at Kale. This recording, this conversation, it is the first time in 52 years that I have heard two people from our species actually speak to each other, not at each other, not through carefully constructed statements designed to avoid offense, but to each other. She turned to face the assembled councils. I move that we continue negotiations under the framework demonstrated in this recording. No translator array unless specifically requested. Direct conversation between designated representatives. Kale Varen and Empress Saren to serve as primary contacts. The silence that followed was profound. Then a younger human delegate spoke up. That's completely unprecedented. It violates every diplomatic protocol we have. Good, the elder said. Our protocols gave us 52 years of silence. Perhaps it is time to try something different. Another Kurnathi council member stepped forward. Elder Myreth, with respect the Empress, violated direct orders, sealed a diplomatic chamber against council authority, made unilateral decisions with severe consequences. Yes, Myreth agreed. She did all those things. And in doing so, she accomplished what 112 previous delegations could not. She created a genuine connection with the human representative. She demonstrated that understanding is possible. At what cost? Someone demanded. At the cost of certainty, Mareth said, of rigid protocol, of the comfortable distance that lets us avoid real risk. She paused. I would say the price was reasonable. Morven was studying the data pad in his hand. Kale recognized the expression. He was reading something, processing, calculating. The recording, Morven said slowly, has been heard by every delegate in both diplomatic corps, approximately 800 individuals. And the response is, he looked up, overwhelmingly positive. That got everyone's attention. 72% of human delegates surveyed in the last 10 minutes support continuing with the Varen-Saren model. 81% believe the recording demonstrates successful cross-species communication. 68% want to establish language exchange programs based on this framework. He turned to face Kale. You may have violated protocol, but apparently you've also given everyone hope for the first time in 5 decades. A Kyernathi aide stepped forward, holding her own device. Our preliminary survey shows similar results. 84% support continuation. 79% believe the Empress demonstrated wisdom rather than weakness. The murmurs shifted, less anger, more possibility. Mareth smiled. It was a small thing, but in the context of the last 2 hours, it felt enormous. Then we vote, she said formally, on whether to approve the continuation of human Kyernathi dialogue under direct communication protocols with Kale, Varen, and Empress Saren as primary representatives. The vote was not unanimous, but it didn't need to be. Kyernathi Council, 8 in favor, 3 abstentions, 1 opposed. Human delegation, 17 in favor, 4 opposed, 2 abstentions. Approved. Kale felt something in his chest unknot, something he hadn't realized was wound so tight. Saren's expression didn't change dramatically, but her shoulders lowered. Just slightly. Enough. Morven stepped forward, extended his hand to Kale. 6 months, he said. You and the Empress have 6 months to develop a working framework for permanent diplomatic relations. Fail and we return to standard protocol. Succeed? He didn't finish, didn't need to. Succeed and everything changes. Kale shook his hand. Understood. Mareth approached Saren, spoke in Kyernathi but loud enough for others to hear. You took a great risk, Empress. I hope you understand what you have committed yourself to. Saren inclined her head. I understand completely, Elder, and I am prepared. The crowds began to disperse, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. Aides conferring, delegates debating, the machinery of diplomacy grinding back into motion but moving in a new direction. Within minutes, the antechamber had mostly cleared. Kale and Saren stood at the threshold of the crystalline hall. The chamber behind them felt different now. No longer a carefully controlled environment for preventing miscommunication. A witness to something new. Saren turned to him. We will meet again in 3 weeks to begin framework development. I'll be there. And Kale, she switched to English. Practice your pronunciation. You still sound like you're arguing about shipping routes. He laughed, couldn't help it. You practice too. Your English has a very formal diplomatic tone that makes everything sound like a declaration of war. I will work on that. She extended her hand, human gesture, offered in recognition. He took it, felt the slight difference in temperature, the subtle strength. Thank you, she said quietly, for being brave enough to speak first. Thank you for being brave enough to answer. They stood there for a moment, 2 people from different worlds who had found a way to understand each other. Then Saren released his hand, turned, and walked back toward her delegation. Kale watched her go. Morven appeared at his shoulder. You realize you just changed the entire structure of first contact protocol. I'm aware. And that you'll spend the next 6 months under intense scrutiny from both species. Also aware, Morven was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Kale looked at him, surprised. Don't misunderstand him, Morven continued. You violated direct orders, ignored protocol, created a diplomatic incident, and I'm going to have to write a very long report about all of it. I figured. But you also proved that sometimes the rules exist because we're afraid to try something different. And sometimes fear is the worst possible advisor. He clapped Kale on the shoulder once, then walked away. Kale stood alone in the empty corridor. Behind him, the crystalline hall's lights began to dim. The translator array powered down, its work complete. Not the last translation, the first conversation. 8 months later, the Language Institute occupied an entire wing of Station Meridian. Bright open spaces filled with the sound of people struggling to make sounds their vocal structures weren't designed for. Kale stood at the front of the classroom. 40 students, 20 human, 20 Kurnathi, all of them voluntarily learning each other's languages. All of them struggling. All of them trying anyway. The key, Kale was saying in Kurnathi, is not to get it perfect. The key is to be willing to sound ridiculous and keep going. One of the human students raised a hand. How long did it take you to stop sounding ridiculous? I'll let you know when it happens. The Kurnathi students made that sound, the one that was almost but not quite a laugh. They'd learned to stop hiding it. The door at the back of the classroom opened. Saren entered. She wore simple robes today, not the formal regalia of state, just the practical clothing of someone here to work. The studentess stood immediately. Please, Saren said in English, still careful but more confident than 8 months ago. Remain seated. I am not here as Empress. I am here as student. She moved to the front of the room, stood next to Kale. I thought I might practice my English, she said to the class, if Instructor Varen will permit. Kale switched to Kurnathi. And I thought I might practice my pronunciation, if guest lecturer Saren will tolerate it. I will try, she said, the almost smile appearing, though I make no promises. The students watched them with fascination. This was what they'd come to see. Not a lecture, not a demonstration. Proof that it was possible. The lesson continued, Kale stumbling through Kurnathi grammar, Saren carefully constructing English sentences, both of them making mistakes, both of them correcting each other gently, both of them laughing when the errors were particularly bad. After class, they walked through the station corridors together. The permanent treaty framework is nearly complete, Saren said. The councils will vote on it next month. Think it'll pass? The projections suggest 92% approval. Remarkable considering where we started. Where we started was 52 years of silence. Yes, and now we have shuttle routes, cultural exchanges, joint research programs, and 40,000 people enrolled in language courses across both species. Kyle watched the corridor ahead, humans and Kurnathi walking together, not integrated yet, not fully, but present, sharing space, learning to coexist. We did okay, he said quietly. We took a risk, Saren corrected, and we were fortunate it worked. You don't believe in fortune. I believe in effort and courage, and the willingness to be wrong if it means learning something true. They reached the observation deck, the same one where Morven had given Kale his final briefing. A lifetime ago, 8 months ago. Below the Kurnathi vessel that had brought Saren sat next to 3 human ships, crews working together, learning each other's systems, building something new. I have been asked, Saren said, to consider serving another term as Empress, to oversee the integration process. What did you say? I said I would consider it if I could have an advisor, someone who understood both cultures, who spoke both languages, who was willing to tell me when I was wrong. Kale looked at her. She met his gaze. I am offering you a position, formal diplomatic liaison, permanent assignment to the Integration Council. That's a significant commitment. It is. You would need to relocate, spend half your time on Kurnath, learn our culture from the inside, become something between human and Kurnathi diplomatic representative. A bridge. And the other half of my time. Here, teaching, building the language programs, ensuring the next generation doesn't need translators either. Kyle thought about his small apartment, his solitary 3 a.m. practice sessions, the isolation of learning alone. He thought about the last 8 months, the students, the progress, the hope. I accept, he said. Saren smiled, the real smile, the one she'd learned to let show. Good, because I already told the council you would. That's presumptuous. I learned from an excellent example. They stood together, watching the ships below. 2 people who had learned each other's languages in secret, who had risked everything on a conversation, who had built a bridge with nothing but words and the courage to speak them honestly. Behind them, a memorial plaque had been installed on the wall. Kale turned to read it. Translator Array 9, The Last Barrier, The First Bridge, 2089 Suenam. Below that, in both Kirnathi and English, the inscription read, "Sometimes the most important translations are the ones we do ourselves." Kale traced the Kirnathi characters with his finger. Saren watched him, then reached out and touched the English words. For a moment they stood there, each reading the other's language, each understanding. It was a small thing, but it was everything. Saren read it too, then looked at him. "Ready to continue?" she asked. "Always," Kale replied. She paused, then added in Kirnathi, "My brother would have liked you." Kale answered in English, "I wish I could have known him." "You do," Saren said softly. "Every time you teach, every time you choose understanding over certainty, you carry what he believed." And together they walked toward whatever came next.